October 25, 1945, Washington, D.C., inside the Oval Office. The air is heavy. Two men sit across from each other. They are separated by the resolute desk, but in reality, they are separated by a universe. Behind the desk sits Harry S. Truman. He is not a large man. He does not have the aristocratic bearing of Franklin Roosevelt. He looks like what he is, a man of Missouri dirt, haberdasheries, and county courthouses. He wears a double-breasted suit that fits him like armor. His spectacles are thick, magnifying eyes that have spent the last 6 months staring into the abyss of casualty reports, invasion maps, and the grim arithmetic of survival. Across from him sits the most famous scientist on Earth, J. Robert Oppenheimer. The contrast is violent. Oppenheimer is gaunt, almost skeletal. His suit hangs off his frame like a shroud. He is vibrating with a nervous, kinetic energy, his long fingers working at nothing. He is the American Prometheus, the man who stole fire from the gods and gave it to the United States Army. But today he does not look like a titan. He looks like a man haunting his own life. Truman is watching him with the cold, flat gaze of a poker player. The president has a schedule to keep. He has a post-war order to build. He has the Soviet Union staring across the ruins of Europe. He does not have time for the neuroses of a theoretical physicist. The conversation has been drifting for minutes, awkward, halting. Oppenheimer is speaking in riddles, talking about the international control of atomic energy, but his voice is shaking. He is not acting like an advisor. He is acting like a penitent at a confessional. Suddenly, Oppenheimer stops. He looks down at his hands that are wringing together, white-knuckled and trembling. He looks up at the president, his eyes watery, and he drops the facade. "Mr. President," he whispers, his voice cracking, "I feel I have blood on my hands." The silence that follows is not the silence of respect. It is the silence of a vacuum. Truman freezes. The polite politician's smile vanishes from his face. In the mind of the president, a line has just been crossed. This isn't a confession, it is an insult. To understand why this moment shattered Oppenheimer's standing with the most powerful man on Earth, and why Truman would later viciously label him a crybaby, we have to strip away the mythology. We have to look past the movie screens and the history books that paint Oppenheimer as a tragic, saintly figure. We have to look at the cold mechanics of war. We have to look at the burden of the executive. And we have to understand the unforgiving difference between the man who builds the gun and the man who has to pull the trigger. To understand the rage sitting behind Harry Truman's spectacles, you cannot start in 1945. You have to go back 27 years. September 27th, 1918, the Vosges Mountains, France. Captain Harry Truman is in the mud. He is 34 years old, commanding Battery D of the 129th Field Artillery. It is the height of the Meuse-Argonne offensive. The air is filled with the scream of incoming shells and the smell of mustard gas. This is not a theoretical war. This is a war of severed limbs and drowning horses. Truman is not a general moving pins on a map. He is in the shit. He sees what high explosives do to the human body. He sees the fear in the eyes of the boys under his command. Boys from Kansas City and Independence who look to him to keep them alive. One night, the Germans launch a surprise barrage. The men of Battery D panic. They start to run. It is a rout in the making. Truman doesn't quote philosophy. He doesn't freeze. He stands up in the stirrups of his horse, in the middle of the shelling, and he screams at them. He uses language that would make a sailor blush. He shames them, orders them, wills them back to their guns. And they go, they stand and fight. That night, Harry Truman learned the most important lesson of his life. Command is not about being right. Command is about acting. It is about taking the chaos of the world and forcing it into a shape that allows your men to survive. Fast forward to April 12th, 1945. Truman is vice president. He has been in the job for 82 days. He has met with Roosevelt exactly twice. He knows nothing of the Manhattan Project. He is a political utility player, kept in the dark. Then the phone rings. "Harry, the president is dead." In a heartbeat, the weight of the free world crashes onto the shoulders of a man who was buying his own socks a week ago. When he is briefed on the gadget, the atomic bomb, he doesn't see it as a scientific marvel. He sees it through the eyes of that artillery captain in the Vosges. He looks at the alternative. By the summer of 1945, the plans for Operation Downfall are on his desk. The invasion of Japan. The estimates are nauseating. The Joint Chiefs are predicting a slaughter. They tell him to expect 500,000 American casualties on the beaches of Kyushu alone. They tell him the Japanese are training schoolgirls to fight with sharpened bamboo spears. They tell him the war will drag on until 1947. Truman reads the letters from mothers whose sons have already died in Okinawa and Iwo Jima. He knows that every day the war continues. Another 1,000 telegrams are sent out. To Truman, the atomic bomb is not the destroyer of worlds. It is a weapon. It is a bigger, louder artillery shell. It is a lever to pry the Japanese empire into surrender without sacrificing an entire generation of American men. He makes the call. He doesn't agonize publicly. He doesn't write poetry about it. He signs the paper. August 6, 1945. Hiroshima is vaporized. August 9th, 1945. Nagasaki is destroyed. August 15th, 1945. Japan surrenders. The war is over. The boys are coming home. Truman sleeps well at night. He believes, with every fiber of his being, that he did the only thing a commander could do. He traded enemy lives for American lives. It was a binary choice. It was brutal. It was necessary. But while Truman is sleeping, Robert Oppenheimer is waking up screaming. While Truman was learning the grit of command in the mud of France, Robert Oppenheimer was living in the stratosphere of the mind. Oppenheimer is a creature of the abstract. He reads Sanskrit for fun. He debates quantum mechanics with Bohr and Einstein. He is wealthy, cultured, and fragile. When he is chosen to lead Los Alamos, it is the greatest intellectual challenge in history. He gathers the smartest men on the planet and drives them to do the impossible. For 3 years, he is the charismatic center of the Manhattan Project. He is focused on the how, not the why. Can we split the atom? Can we compress the core? Can we make it work? But as the date of the test approaches, the reality begins to seep in. July 16, 1945, 5:29 a.m. The Jornada del Muerto Desert. The Trinity Test. Oppenheimer is lying face down in a bunker, 10,000 yards from zero. The countdown is ticking over the loudspeakers. 10, 9, 8. In his head, he is terrified. He is terrified the bomb will be a dud, and he will be a failure. And he is terrified it will work, and he will be a monster. 0. The sky is ripped open. A light brighter than 1,000 noons floods the desert. The mountains turn purple. The heat hits them like a physical blow. Oppenheimer watches the fireball rise, boiling and churning, turning into that iconic mushroom shape. And in that moment, the physics stops mattering. The equation is solved. Now, he is left with the ghost. He famously recalls the line from the Bhagavad Gita, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." It is a profound spiritual crisis. Oppenheimer realizes that he hasn't just built a bomb, he has handed humanity the keys to its own coffin. In the weeks after Hiroshima, while the rest of America is celebrating, Oppenheimer is unraveling. He sees the photos from the blast zones, the shadows burned into concrete, the skin hanging off survivors. He realizes that the gadget he affectionately named is actually a device of ultimate horror. He begins to talk. He gives speeches. He writes letters. He tells the press that science has known sin. He becomes the face of nuclear guilt. But here is the crucial psychological twist. Oppenheimer projects his guilt onto everyone else. He assumes that because he feels this crushing moral weight, the man who actually gave the order, the president, must feel it tenfold. He assumes that Truman is sitting in the White House, racking his conscience, desperate for someone to share the burden with. He thinks that he and Truman are partners in this tragedy. He thinks they are two men standing at the edge of the abyss, looking down together. He is wrong. He walks into the Oval Office on that October morning, thinking he is speaking to a fellow sinner. He thinks he is there to seek absolution, or perhaps to grant it. He doesn't realize he is walking into the den of a lion who has already licked the blood from his paws and moved on, back to the Oval Office. "I feel I have blood on my hands." Truman stares at the physicist. The silence stretches. tight as a piano wire. Truman looks at Oppenheimer's wringing hands. He looks at the teary eyes, and he doesn't see a tortured genius. He sees a narcissist. In Truman's worldview, there is a hierarchy of responsibility. The soldier pulls the trigger. The general points the way. The president gives the order. Oppenheimer didn't drop the bomb. Oppenheimer didn't fly the Enola Gay. Oppenheimer didn't have to look the mothers of America in the eye and tell them why he didn't use the weapon that could have saved their sons. Truman did that. To Truman, the blood is not on the hands of the scientist who did the math. The blood is on the hands of the commander-in-chief. For Oppenheimer to claim that weight to waltz into the executive office and whine about his conscience is a theft of valor. It implies that Oppenheimer is the main character of this war. It implies that the moral burden of the presidency is secondary to the emotional state of a scientist. Truman's face reddens. The artillery captain is surfacing. "The blood is on my hands," Truman snaps, his voice cutting through the air. "Let me worry about that." Oppenheimer flinches. He wasn't expecting anger. He was expecting empathy. But Truman isn't done. He reaches into his breast pocket. He pulls out a crisp, white folded handkerchief. He holds it out across the desk, dangling it in front of the weeping physicist, like you would to a toddler with a skinned knee. "Well," Truman says, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "here, would you like to wipe them?" It is a devastating gesture. It is a total emasculation. In one motion, Truman reduces Oppenheimer's existential crisis, the crisis of the atomic age, to a child's tantrum. Oppenheimer stares at the handkerchief. He is paralyzed. He doesn't take it. He realizes violently and suddenly the chasm between them. He tries to pivot. He stammers something about international regulations, about the Soviets. Truman cuts him off. He stands up. "It will all come out in the wash," Truman says dismissively. The meeting is over. Oppenheimer stands, shaky, pale, and humiliated. He turns and walks out of the Oval Office, a man who went in looking for a priest and found a judge. As the door clicks shut, Truman turns to his Undersecretary of State, Dean Acheson, who has been watching the exchange in stunned silence. Truman shakes his head, disgusted. He gestures to the door. "I don't want to see him in this office ever again." Oppenheimer never fully recovered his standing in the White House. Months later, Truman would cement the verdict in writing. In a letter to Acheson, he described the meeting with brutal clarity. He wrote, "I had to listen to that crybaby scientist wring his hands and tell me he had blood on them. I told him the blood was on my hands and to let me worry about that." Crybaby scientist, that was the epithet that stuck. Oppenheimer spent the rest of his life trying to atone. He was dragged before security hearings, stripped of his clearance, and humiliated by the government he served. He became a martyr to the cause of scientific responsibility. He died believing he had failed to stop the arms race. But Truman never wavered. He never apologized for the bomb. He never looked back. When asked about it years later, he said he slept like a baby every night. This story isn't just about two men who didn't get along. It's about the collision of two incompatible realities. Oppenheimer lived in the world of the theoretical, where every action has an infinite number of reactions, where morality is a complex equation that can never be fully solved. Truman lived in the world of the binary win or lose, live or die, do it or don't. Truman hated the confession because it was self-indulgent. He saw a man who wanted the credit for the intellect, but none of the stain of the result. He saw a man who wanted to be important enough to be guilty, but not strong enough to carry it. The lesson for us, the lesson Truman was trying to teach with that handkerchief, is about the burden of the final call. There are those who design the machine and there are those who have to operate it. When you step into the arena of high command, whether it's leading a platoon, running a company, or governing a nation, you leave your handkerchief at the door. You accept the blood. You accept the ghosts. You make the call that saves the most lives, even if it damns your soul. And then you move on. Because if you don't, someone else will. And they might not have a hand steady enough to keep the world from burning. Truman understood something Oppenheimer never could. The leader doesn't get the luxury of tears. The leader gets the job,